Every great company starts with someone who says, there's gotta be a better way. This is the show for founders who go against all odds and push through when the odds say quit. The leaders who trade certainty for the pursuit of their vision and build something remarkable. This is Audacity of Entrepreneurs, where serial entrepreneurs, exited founders, executives, and their advisors have unfiltered conversations about what it really takes to build a company. Here is your host, Nick Urison.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Audacity of Entrepreneurs. My next guest today is a veteran of the marketing industry. He launched 31 brands. And when I first spoke to him, he said 15 of them with successful exits. But as of this morning, I believe that number jumped to 16 successful exits. And as we record this, today is June 23rd, 2026. So this probably will air a few weeks after that. So knowing him, he will probably have one more exit by the time this episode airs. So anyway, as of today, 16 successful exits. He is the CEO and founder of Rocket Science, which is an award-winning growth marketing company, and also helps founders exit through M&A. He's been around for 3 decades, and he doesn't look a year older than 40, 45 maybe.
You're too kind.
And when he's not working, he subscribes to the philosophy of, when was the last time you did something for the first time? So he's always doing something for the first time. So with that, everybody, meet my guest, Mark Addison. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. So everybody, today we're going to talk about something Mark is an expert in. In addition, what this show is all about. So the chances of the two coming together was very slim, but here, totally by coincidence, it's happening. So the subject is how to become the leader in your sector by using Audacity. We're going to start by how to identify an audacious claim with high strategic value. This is all about valuation. So what Mark has really mastered in decades of his work is using Audacity to increase your valuation. Make a claim that you can stand by that will impact your value. Then we're going to move on to selling that Audacity, convincing the board about positioning your claim. Because as you know, the board is there to make sure that you're not doing anything that you're going to get told off later or get you in trouble, impact valuation. So how do you sell this to your board? And most important, the third is what not to do, because most people will leave that part out. So with that, let's jump right in, Mark. So we talked about identifying. So tell us, how do you go about doing this?
Yeah. So thanks, Nick. Thanks for outlining that all. And I'll just say a few sort of umbrella terms also. We are about finding strategic valuation, building reputations and revenues is sort of our mantra on the growth marketing side. But we try to find a story nugget within the company that resonates. We work mostly with tech companies, so we usually look for a kernel of technical truth. What we try to stay away from is, and this is a trap that a lot of marketing companies fall into or marketers fall into, is the stunt, right? The visibility stunt, the crazy thing that gets you awareness, gets you on the map, but doesn't really have staying power and doesn't really speak to the company and why the company is different. So because we work with so many tech companies, we have engineers, right? We work with engineers. Engineers are among the most skeptical people. You cannot sell them technology by putting lipstick on the pig. Most engineers sort of have this default bias against marketing. It's a necessary evil at best for a lot of those engineers. And the used car salesman sort of icon is sort of what they all fear. And so we just try to stay away from that. But that said, and what your podcast seems to be about, is you have to be a little audacious. You can't just show a checkbox of features and say, and we have 2 more checkboxes than our competitors, so that's why you should buy us, and expect that that people are going to talk about your company. You can't expect to go that approach and become a sector leader. And you were right to point out that we've got the growth marketing side and we also work on some exits. The reason why we ended up being so successful at helping companies exit is we created sector leaders. In our growth marketing side, we ended up building companies that were the leaders in their sector. And guess what? When a buyer goes out into the marketplace and says, you know, we need to, we're going to do some organic growth, and we're going to be looking for some technologies to tuck in, or we're going to look for some from customer beachheads that leading company has already penetrated, and maybe tuck those companies in, or even better, a very strategic technology, right? Think back in the day when when Facebook acquired Instagram, right? They were on the eve of their IPO, and everybody was saying Facebook was going to stumble and fall flat on their face on the mobile. So they needed a mobile technology, and Instagram was that technology. And even though it didn't have any revenues, it had a strategic role in moving Facebook in a mobile, and that was going to get them through their IPO. So we have to create this kind of audacious claim built around a coherent and technology truth, in order to be credible. And if you do that right, you win over the engineers because you're not just BSing. You do grow into the sector leader because you are willing to sort of be a little more out there than most of your competitors. And then you'll win on the exit, because when the acquiring companies go look for a company to acquire, they don't want the third best or the fourth best in the category. They want the first or second best. And you're one of those leaders, so you end up getting acquired. So, our successes haven't been luck. They all kind of link together. And hopefully I've explained how those link together. I think your question was, how do you even find that strategic nugget, that goal? And that, you have to spend time with the companies, right? You have to understand their operations, because a lot of the best stories are the non-obvious ones, right? And the only way you even learn about these non-obvious ones is if you spend time with the engineers, and you spend time with the C-levels, and you understand the operations, and with, like us, you understand the technology and well enough to understand what is actually a really innovative and interesting technology versus sort of an also-ran. And you sit in on some of the customer calls. That's how you find it. You can't shortcut that aspect.
As you were explaining, I was thinking back. Tell me if this is applicable to making a claim. So I've been around, but I'm not a marketing expert. I understand marketing. It's not just my thing. I'm an engineer also by training. So I like systems and processes. So when it comes to marketing, my approach is, as a business owner, okay, I need to understand the right things to do. I being able to say this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing. That is the extent of my marketing. I'm by no means, I do come up with ideas here and there. So don't look at me as a marketing person, even though sometimes I may be doing the marketing talk. Okay, that's not me. That's just me having an educated approach. So go way back to the years both you and I started, 97, 98. Those days, even then, I knew nothing about marketing. So I get a hold of this little book called 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. Great book, small book, and you go through it. the first rule is be the first in your category. And then underneath, you start reading. If somebody else is already in your category, create your own category. So I thought, okay, I'm going to apply this. And at the time, I was building an online store platform, today's Shopify, back in 97, 98. So I thought, how do I do this? But I wasn't going to really spend time on this. I thought, let's get this out and start generating revenue. And as soon as we rolled out the first version, we ranked number 3 in the country. They just picked us up and they ranked us number 3. I thought, oh, with this, silly little thing that we put together, we got number 3. I'm going to become number 1. But there was already categories created. And of course, we weren't going to be number 1 because they were much stronger. So I spoke to the research company and I thought, let's put this rule to work. And they said to me, okay, we want to evaluate again this year for this year's rankings. And I said, you put everything under, those days there was no online store, but shopping cart. It was shopping carts. I said, what we have is really not a cart. And she said, then where do we put you? I said, well, I don't really see any category. So I said, well, you know what it is today? Now it's about e-business, turning your company from being a business to becoming an e-business. And that needs a platform, and that's what we provide. So it's an e-business platform. I said, oh, that sounds a lot more, unique, and there's nothing like it. And we'll create the category for you. Well, guess who became number 1? So this is a bit long-winded way of me asking you. Rather than find technology, do you think that you can use categorization to make yourself have a claim? So to allow you to have a claim that you are something in your category. What are your thoughts about that?
The easy answer is yes. The more nuanced answer is yes, if you've got some real technology behind you to prove it. Again, it can't just be BS. I can think of a company that we launched years back when location-based services were coming out. And as in many technologies, the hype sort of is a couple years ahead of the technology. So location-based services had a few false starts sort of as a sector. And so it attracted a lot of skeptics at some point. And along comes this technology, and they are ostensibly location-based services, but in a very specific category, they were competing directly against RFID systems. So, we piggybacked off of RFID because we knew that our buyers were looking for RFID solutions, and we were just going to offer ostensibly a location-based services solution for their alternative to their RFID. So yes, you can create a new category. Just be careful because you have to understand, what's that customer journey? What are they looking for? A new category by definition is unknown. So nobody is going to be typing in the keywords for your brand new category because they don't know it yet. So you have to sort of be careful about sort of being the category adjacent and starting off that way, sort of building off an existing known category and then just showing people, as you did, that, hey, you were looking for this? Well, we're this adjacent category and we're kind of like the new thing that's happening. This is where the technology is heading. And you'll see, especially in the tech sector, a lot of customers want that. And engineers do enjoy novel engineering approaches, right? And they usually are willing to sort of take a flyer on some of those things if they think it's clever.
Yeah. Okay, so the lesson is, again, what you said originally, do not, if it's category based, make sure you have something to back it up with. Don't just make the claim. And also now the category needs to be promoted. So you have to be prepared for that. This is often the case, right? When you have something new and it's a new category, that's nice. But now, who knows, right?
Yeah, especially like in hardware. I remember meeting the co-CEO of BlackBerry, and he was telling the story about how they, sort of created that category. And the answer was with gobs of money. And not all of us have that kind of money. So just be careful about how much you bite off.
Oh, actually, talk about BlackBerry. Did you see that it's a movie or a show? No, it's a show. It's several episodes. It's story BlackBerry's story.
I did watch that story, and they missed a few parts that, like the whole thing about, the BlackBerry being from the stain on his shirt. I heard it differently from the co-CEO.
Really?
Yeah, totally different story. He told us that they hired a branding agency to come up with the names, and he went through this whole sort of spiel on how he got pitched the empty vessel. And the empty vessel is a word that essentially doesn't mean anything yet, but with gobs and gobs of marketing money, you can make it mean something. And so BlackBerry was the empty vessel in mobile tech, and then with enough advertising and marketing, it became synonymous with this mobile handheld. But the key ingredient there is gobs and gobs of money.
Oh yeah, yeah. And also, by the way, money that was taken for something they could not fulfill. Right? They didn't have and the guy was selling all the time, taking orders, and they had no capacity. There was no solution to meet the demand.
Well, what the way read it, or the takeaway I got from the TV show was that they wanted to manufacture domestically for the higher quality, and they were just and that sort of capped their scale because they were just unwilling to go overseas and accept a lower quality until until the mezzanine stage investors came in and took a bunch of board seats and managed to flip that decision to their way of thinking. And according to the movie, that seemed to be then that led to the downfall.
Yeah. And the other thing that I saw was, and this also is important, again, it goes partly to the claim that you make, and how much do you believe in what you are claiming. And in that case, it was the founder's signature that no way we're going to lose the keyboard. No, that's us. That's what makes us unique. And when they came with this keyboard that appears when you want to use it like we have today, says no way. And he just completely dismissed it as a direction, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Well, and tech is one of those industries where you really can unseat the 800-pound gorilla, and it's
oh yeah.
pretty amazing to see that happen sometimes in a
Yeah.
sector.
Well, I mean, remember Yahoo in the early days? That was the search engine. And I never forget, I was in this building with several companies, and Yahoo was at that point, there was no Google, and Yahoo was the market leader. And I had this guy, an English guy, working in a small office and building something. So I said, "What are you working on?" He says, "I'm creating a search engine." I said, "You crazy? This market is gone. Yahoo, you're gonna compete with Yahoo." You know what he was doing? He was building he said, "Well, mine is different. I'm building a search engine for porn sites." So he wanted to create his own claim, so to
Yeah,
speak, to
yeah,
be
yeah.
the category.
Well, and famously, Google was able to unseat the 800-pound gorilla as a search because
Oh
they
yeah.
they, they came up with the reputation, the page rank, and everybody was competing to give you more results, but after 1,000 results, it became less useful, and then they came up with a better way to rank the results based on quality, and that was the whole page rank system.
I love talking about the Google uh, history because I want to see what your take is on my approach. Yes, page rank, that was the concept that made it different, technology wise, made perfect sense. But really, as far as go to market strategy, I thought that was the genius in Google's approach. Because if you again think back, when Yahoo came out, if you remember, it was 14 categories, 2 columns, 7 categories on either side. And you will just select, and underneath in lower, smaller fonts, subcategories. So you would drill down. There was no real search. Search was not the concept, so to speak, but category drill down. And then what would you find? You would find all the listings under it that were relevant. Well, what were those listings? They were websites. So, in order for Yahoo to sell advertising, they needed to have a lot of content. And those days, being the early days of the internet, the number of websites that were, available, it was limited. In fact, that's the reason why one website would appear under multiple categories. So, what did Google do? In my opinion, they thought, okay, this is not about being a search engine. This is about having enough content to show to users. So we're going to first go after the content and also make money at the same time when nobody was making money. So they went to libraries, they went to universities, and they said, will you make us your search engine? So all you had to do was they made a licensing deal, and if you wanted to search all the content, you would just use the Google search within the site. So of course, these SOBs were just indexing the whole internet in the meantime. That's what they were doing. So I never forget, one day somebody said, have you checked this new site? It's called Google. It's for search. I thought, oh, let me check. And then I go, and it's one big search box. I thought, what is this? This is no website, because I'm looking for those fancy looking websites, and this search comes up. But guess what? Anything you search, something came up. And that's what ultimately catapulted Google to being the search engine, and Yahoo was very quickly pushed aside. That's my take. What are your thoughts?
I have to confess ignorance on that. I wasn't as close to the action. I'm learning from you, hearing about it right now. Yeah.
I mean, it was fascinating because this didn't really click for me until Yahoo simply faded away, and I thought, oh my God, these guys were playing the long game of cornering the content market.
Well, as you were describing it, because I don't remember Yahoo being that way, but as you were describing it, I was going, oh, well, that's a classic taxonomy, right? You figure out the the genus and the subgenus, and they're
right.
All the way out, and it sounds like all they did was expose the taxonomy in some visual way, so you could crawl your way down. You're right. That's not really search. That's go discover on your own, go crawl this on your own. And it sounds like Google then made that massively easier by saying, well, just type what you want.
Exactly, yeah. And in fact, Yahoo was thrown into this major turmoil. And okay, now that search is here, who are we? And they hired this lady who is the CEO from, I think, entertainment industry, and they decided to be a media company. And to this day, frankly, what is Yahoo? I mean, we use different parts of Yahoo for different purposes, but you can't really define what Yahoo is. It's just one of those things. It just is out there. Obviously makes money, but Google, in the meantime, forget it.
Yeah.
So great. Okay. Well, we have a lot of old stuff to bring up, but they're the great stories because they are the examples. So let's move on to convincing the board. So you now have identified a claim. It's perfectly legit. You can stand by it. So how do you then go about selling that to the board?
Well, and that takes a little bit of credibility. I'll give you an example. I won't use names on this because I probably still have some NDAs that probably still cover it. But there was a medical software company that we worked with, and they basically built some onboarding software for doctors, for physicians, and it would capture all the stuff that a doctor needs to capture when they bring in a new physician, the patient's name. And in medical speak, they talk about morbidities, modalities, and outcomes. So morbidities is what's wrong with the patient. Modalities is what does the doctor do to actually fix the patient. And then outcomes is there some measurable difference that was made? And can you measure it? Um, and that was all fine and good. And they thought that, interestingly, we were hired originally to do their marketing. Then we were put on pause because they got an unsolicited acquisition offer. The acquisition offer fell through in due diligence. So then they brought us back on, but this time with a more focused marketing goal of sort of remarketing the company at a higher valuation and broader appeal. Because if you think about the depth of the market for a patient onboarding software is probably pretty slim. Back to your question about how do you find that strategic nugget, we spent some time with the company and we started looking at their operations and started understanding how it works. And we discovered that all of the data from that onboarding software was being databased. And they had, at this point, 22 million records. And they were all first party records, which means they owned it, they could use it, they could do what they wanted with it. And furthermore, we discovered that some larger insurance companies were actually approaching the company to query the database to say, can you tell us, we have authorization requests to pay for the physical therapy treatment for, let's say, a 24-year-old athlete with a torn ACL versus, let's say, an 80-year-old sedentary person with a torn ACL. Same morbidity, totally different, cost in terms of what it's going to take to rehabilitate that customer. And so the database was rich enough that insurance companies could actually almost by body part and morbidity figure out, what's it really going to take? How much do we need to authorize in terms of payments to the doctor to rehabilitate this patient? And so that's when the light bulb went off. It's like, you guys are a data analytics company. The software is almost meaningless. It's just a way of ingesting the information that goes into the database. The database is where the value is. And it's not like the board is smart people. They know that, right? They know how valuable that database is. The convincing was convincing them completely flip the business model. If we were going to get this company acquired, we needed to look at the website as just this, huge SEO canvas. This was a few years ago, so it was before AI. To be discovered as an AI analytics source. And all of the sales, which at that point had been happening transactionally on the website, we kind of needed to move somewhere else. So that meant moving them to a digital pipeline, which actually was more effective anyway. But it was what we had to convince the board of first that we were correct in the strategic assessment, which, most of them pretty readily said, yeah, I think you're right. But then it was like pulling the levers. How do we do this? How do we wipe the website clean and not lose sales? Oh, we moved sales to digital. Okay. How do we become a sector leader? And that we've discovered that the three founders were all practicing physicians. They'd all been in practice for quite some time. They'd all co-authored some of those peer-reviewed medical journal articles, which is hard to do, right? Anybody can publish, but to publish in a peer-reviewed journal is a whole sort of order of magnitude more difficult. And between the three of them, they had something like 75 or 80 peer-reviewed journals. So we're going, these guys are very well respected. So we took those guys out to the press, and we hooked up with a lobbyist on Capitol Hill who was in touch with some of the upcoming healthcare legislation. And then we had the founders of the company talking to the press about how is this upcoming legislation going to impact insurance companies, and how their operations are and what kind of data are the insurance companies going to require. And that just immediately made the founders sort of thought leader spokespersons, but in a credible way, right?
Right.
Again, it's not like they just all of a sudden appeared on the scene and did a bunch of Instagram ads and declared themselves experts, right? They actually had something meaningful to say. It was pertinent, because that's why we went to Capitol Hill to find this lobbyist about upcoming legislation, because you can talk about something that's new. And we are very careful to make this meaningful for insurance companies, because what we realize is that the buyer of this company in all likelihood is going to be one of the big insurance companies. It turned out it wasn't, but that was our hypothesis going in. But so we thought we need to be, thought leaders in the eyes of those large insurance companies. So that's kind of how we brought the board along, and that's how we, pulled the levers to actually make this happen. And as it turned out, they were acquired by a very well-respected private equity company based in New York as part of a roll-up. And they were looking, and it was a healthcare roll-up, and they were looking for a data piece, and this plugged in very nicely as the data piece. So it wasn't an insurance company, but it was sort of a close proxy.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is establishing some kind of thought leadership in that very claim that you are making is the path to being able to sell this to your board successfully.
It certainly helps, right? Boards react well when you say that you can be, number one or number two in the sector. Nobody jumps up and down for joy saying, hey, we can be number 9 in the sector.
Well, actually, you know what? There are so many examples of this, but this is, I wasn't born in America. So before I moved here, actually, I got into the internet business before I moved here. And it was like just before and then during, and then I continued and never left the industry. And those days I'm learning about the US market, marketing, it's all coming together, positioning, acquisitions, mergers, blah, blah. And one thing that somebody said to me, he said, dude, look, whatever you do in America, there is no room for number 3. There's always number 1, and there's always number 2. He said, look, Coke and Pepsi. Who is the third one?
Yeah.
And then I thought, holy cow. And I'm looking around. There really is no number 3. It's always there's always number 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's good
3,
insight.
nobody remembers.
And if anything, it's become worse, at least in tech. It is definitely, tech definitely is a winner take all kind of a game to play in. Before COVID, almost all of our clients were international companies coming into North America. So we've worked with a lot of international companies. And to your point, one of the, talking about convincing the board and C-levels, one of the harder conversations is helping them understand just how big this marketplace is. You can be king of the hill in another country, and you can come here and all of a sudden you're not the big fish in a small pond. You are a very tiny fish in a huge ocean. And that takes some getting used to. And not just, and I'm not talking about sort of pride, I'm talking about just the mechanics of
Sure. Scalability.
You have to think massive scale here. And in fact, there's one company that came in there out of Germany, and they want to expand in the US, and they wanted to do some organic marketing and some paid marketing. And we had to tell them, there is just no way you are going to be able to buy your way into the United States. And this was already a decade ago. And we could already tell them, you cannot afford enough digital ads to buy your way into this country. It's just not going to happen. Not if you had 100 times the funding that you do. You're going to have to, and that was another one, talk about audacious. This was an ad blocker. And we convinced them that we weren't going to be able to buy our way in, we had to, that old joke from P.T. Barnum that says, find a parade and get in front of it. It was kind of that strategy. And we actually convinced them to write a manifesto, sort of like a Bill of Rights style consumer manifesto around, how ads should behave and respect the consumer and things like that. And I'm totally glossing over all the details, but it took. Press loved it, and we really leaned in. It was authentic. We set up a whole separate landing page. We went out to ad agencies to sort of sign on with us on the main tenets of the manifesto. We went to the Electronic Frontier Foundation and had their lawyers kind of vet this. And I mean, we didn't, it wasn't lipstick on the pig kind of stuff. We made a concerted effort to take all of the pent-up anger and rage among consumers around sort of irresponsible advertising and just funnel it towards this manifesto and this protest movement. And it worked. And for the next 2 years, we were growing faster than Facebook. We ended up with 1.3 billion downloads in about 39 months and became the number one, not just the number one ad blocker, but the number one browser extension on pretty much all of the on all of the browser stores. We're number one everywhere.
Well, what is the brand? The yogurt, the organic yogurt. It's up in New England area. Stony
Hill?
Is it Stony Hill? I forget the name of the brand. Stony something. Do you know their story?
No, I do not know their story.
Oh my God, the founder. We had a fairly intimate event in my business organization, about 25, 30 of us. And he came with his wife to tell his story. I'm talking about 14, 15 years ago now. And you know who his first investor was? His mother-in-law. They were literally working out of a barn, because being the organic claim and everything else. And his vision was, this is the food industry is dishonest. They're always deceiving people. And I'm going to make an honest, dairy product. So, and the yogurt was the one, and the milk, yogurt, all the dairy products. So anyway, his wife did not believe in him. His mother-in-law did. So, and lends him $5,000. I think that's how he starts. So anyway, he tells this story, and as he told this story, this was already like years old, and you could tell he was still having cold sweats, like with the anxiety he had borrowing money from his mother-in-law when his wife didn't even believe in it. So, but the whole positioning was honesty. So you know what they did? They ran a campaign which went completely wide. They didn't spend a dime on coverage of it. What they did, they set up small teams and they covered their expenses to go to, I believe, 10 states. And the idea was to put a box and put products in it and a sign. And sign simply said, "We trust you, put the money in the box and help yourself." And the idea was, which state is the most honest state?
I think Honest Tea did an ad campaign around that too. They sort of they went around with hidden video cameras to see.
It was on Today's Show. It was everywhere,
Yeah.
And then people were actually following. Where are you guys going next? And of course, once it became so well known, people started putting money in, so it didn't matter. But in those early days, and of course, the company name automatically became synonymous with honesty.
Yeah.
So these are the things. And then again, it goes back to what you said, that having some kind of thought leadership in that space and that positioning,
Well, you
that's
have
going
to
to
have
make
some
it easy.
conviction too. I just talked about that manifesto. I remember sharing this story with another tech company, and they ended up non-hiring us, but they ended up writing a manifesto, right, and putting it up on their website. And of course, it went nowhere, right? Because it's like, dudes, the manifesto was just one small part in a much larger effort to sort of take this pent up anger that I was talking about and all that energy and all of those consumers, those millions and millions, or in this case, billions of consumers, and sort of funnel that energy and give them uh, some agency to say, all right, ad industry, if you cross this line, I'm out. I'm installing an ad blocker, right? So we were sort of like the ultimate, resolution to that anger. It wasn't just the manifesto. You can't just sort of say, "Yeah, we've got this manifesto, and that's going to go viral," right? And of course, it didn't.
You have to believe in it. It's kind of like the movie. I'm sure you've seen the famous movie, A Few Good Men.
Yes.
Yeah. So Tom Cruise is this young lawyer who's never seen the inside of a courtroom. Now has to defend these two Marines, and as part of the whole thing, he has to go to Guantanamo and check the place out. And they say to him, "You better be careful, when you are out there, because these guys are fanatics." And it says, "What are they fanatic about?" About being Marines. Don't discount them. Don't just watch it, and in the end, that he sees it, and that's actually what he uses. So it's interesting. You have to. I say this. You have to eat your own dog shit. So or dog food. So
Dog food. Yeah,
dog food. Yeah, dog
much
shit is
tastier.
yes, yes. Okay, so the last point, what not to do. We kind of covered, but just to spell it out, what are the things not to do if you are making an audacious claim?
Yeah, just be careful that audacious doesn't equal, silly stunt, right? That bears no relationship to your product or your service or what you stand for, and it's just sort of like a one-time stunt to get attention. Those tend to fall flat. Even if they quote unquote go viral for a little bit, they don't build a brand, they don't build a reputation. It's sort of a flash in the pan. Um, don't be inauthentic. This uh, don't think like a marketer. Think more like an engineer, right? Find that kernel of truth in all of this, and then the marketing part is to take that kernel of truth and sort of exaggerate it in a way
Right, right.
that's humorous, or a way that's annoying, or a way that's compelling, or a way that motivates, right? But it's based in a core kernel of truth about your product. That way it can never be inauthentic. It is just sort of an exaggeration, perhaps, but it's still a truth. So
Right.
those are some of the things. And I know that sounds a little bit conceptual, but if you really sit down and think about it, you'll even
No, no,
engineers
listen.
get it.
I tell you, being an engineer, I dissect things all the time and try to figure out those pieces that make the impact, the drivers. What are the drivers? So what you just described is the strategy that was called the war room strategy by the Clinton campaign.
Really?
Did you follow that?
No,
Those
good. I guess
days?
I'm stealing from some guys who know what they're doing. That's good.
Well, I tell you what, and you know who came up with it? George Stephanopoulos and the Jim, what's his name? Jim Carvell. Those two were the architects of the campaign. So knowing that Bill Clinton had a lot of affairs and it was a shady past, they knew that they were going to have all kinds of things coming out. This is the first time he ran for president. They knew that they're going to have to deal with this. So they had to be ready for it. That's where the war room idea came from. So there is, in fact, a documentary called The War Room. It was all filmed, real stuff during the campaign. So they had a three-prong strategy. Whenever there was a scandal, step one, attack the messenger. Attack the messenger. Forget the claim, attack the messenger. The second one is parse the story. Parse the story, all for the purpose of finding one thing that did not have the credibility it should. And then amplify, which would then suffocate the truth.
I'm going to confess something here that half the world's going to love me and half the world's going to hate me. I hate that example. I hate that example because that just shows, that shows our industry at its worst, right? To take a valid or an alleged allegation, I know that's redundant, and ignore it by attacking the messenger and try to debase it by attacking the messenger, I think is just, it's an inauthentic thing to do. It's the wrong thing to do. And if I may, I'd like to maybe just flip that and give you a tangible example of how we played something similar, but I think played it and came at it and took the high ground. And this goes back to the ad block. We had some haters in high places, right? We were sort of attacking some core revenue engines for the publishers. And now there was this particular ad blocker was the only one that actually had a whitelist specifically for those publishers to if they agreed to show ads that adhered to what the consumers consented to, we would whitelist them. So we thought this was a very ethical approach to making ads better. If we create a market incentive for good ads, we can actually encourage more good ads and get rid of the bad ones, the disrespectful ones. So that was like the core tenet. This started as an open source movement, but nonetheless, we had some haters who may not have known the story, or may have known the story but still hated us because it was impacting their revenues, and they had no intentions of changing their ads and making them respectful and courteous or whatever. So we got our fair share of lawsuits, right? But we very quickly figured out, there's different ways of being served papers for a lawsuit, right? There's the guy who knocks on the door and serves you papers. Okay, that's legitimate. It's gone to a court. There's something behind it. And then there's the press release that comes out that says, we're going to sue them, right? So we learned very quickly that this is an intimidation game. Okay, this is not about right or wrong. This is not about respecting consumers. This is about protecting the status quo of your business model and using expensive lawyers to intimidate. And so we said, all right, how do we, as champions for the consumers, combat that potentially negative, this is meant to intimidate us. This was meant to make us look bad, that if the word got out that we were sued, we would somehow look bad. But we said, that's the intimidation. So we posted the lawsuits on our blog. We showed the world. We were totally transparent. We got sued. Let's look at this. Why are they suing us? Well, they don't want us to do this. 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 Why are we doing those things? To protect you, the consumer. That's why we're doing these things. That's why we're going to post this lawsuit on our page, because we want everybody to understand exactly what conversations are going on in those back rooms. It was amazing. Like every time we got one of those, downloads went up. Every time the industry would publish some huge,
Well, I bet a lot of lawyers also looked at it to help you because it resonated with what they stand for.
we never got any pro bono help from any lawyers, so I
No?
don't know about that. But but I think there's ways that you can take the high ground on that. And I'll give you one other example where it just bugged me. But the San Francisco Zoo years back, a tiger escaped the cage and attacked somebody. And what did the zoo do? They hired a crisis PR person to poke holes in the argument. Oh, well, was it their fault that the tiger, were they teaching the tiger, were they attacking? They were trying to find holes in the story. And they were completely sidestepping the fact that someone got hurt badly. There was a failure somehow with the cage. And really sadly, they had to shoot and kill the tiger, but because it was out of its cage, and that was the last result. And I thought that was just the fact that they immediately went to the crisis PR guy instead of fixing the problem and acknowledging the problem. Kind of me as a PR marketer, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I was going, that is the wrong way to use this powerful tool that we have called marketing and PR and press and everything like that. There are ethical and right ways to use it, and you can leverage it, as we've shown many times. There are ethically wrong ways to use it, and we like to take the high ground.
Yeah. So absolutely. Now, the example that I gave for the Clinton campaign, I gave you that it as a working model, except you did the exact opposite of what
We
they
did
did.
the exact opposite. And I've seen a lot of tech companies go hire people from Washington because they have these skills, and
Yeah,
it
yeah.
concerns me a little bit, right? I
But
get,
the reason why they are doing it, because it works, Mark. People respond to it. So I want to bring the conversation to an end by taking your opinion on something. So we are on a podcast. Obviously, we're having our conversation. A lot of people will be interested in what you have to say and this conversation. So in a podcast forum. So in this, making these audacious claims for companies, what do you see as the role of the podcast? And also tell us about your efforts with podcasts. How can people hear more of Mark Addison with podcasts?
what's the role of the podcast? I've discovered that people, whether they're on the train commuting or in the car commuting or just walking, will flick on a podcast and listen. And it's rare in our highly distracted world to get anything more than a second or two of someone's attention. And podcasts somehow get like 30 minutes of somebody's
Yeah.
undivided attention. It's extraordinary. And we explain these stories and the nuances behind them. And, hopefully we tell them in compelling ways so that we engage the audience. So I think that's the power of the podcast. For whatever reason, people listen to them and watch them at moments in their life where they are prepared to actually listen for longer than 2 seconds. So that's extraordinary. And then the other thing is that because I've done some podcasts as well too, it is the best way to approach some expert or somebody that you have admired or somebody that you would want to learn more about, and just flat out ask them, hey, would you spend a half hour with me talking about these things? And there is no way that you could get a half hour of that person's time if you approach them any other way, right? If you could say, I'll buy you lunch, and they'll go, yeah, no thanks, I'll buy my own lunch. I'll buy you coffee, no thanks. Come on to my podcast. We'll spend 30 minutes talking about something that's important to you, and boom, you've got.
I always say everybody wants to be on somebody's podcast because this is the way now to distribute. And it's these small, it's going back to the beginning. It's the smaller communities, except they are forming online, and podcasts are a way for people to tune into things that they are interested. So, how about you? What do you have one, and how can people tune in if you have one?
I did a webinar series during COVID in partnership with KPMG that was all around the M&A, and that was really well attended. I don't currently have a steady podcast, although Nick, I'm waiting for you to convince me otherwise.
Yeah, yeah, I will convince you, no problem. I have a big hammer and I've hit you over the head with it. That's the easiest way. No, I mean, we'll talk about, but I mean, you have what I find, just a quick one, and then we'll end it. When I was a kid, my grandfather was a two-star general. So we would have he would tell us stories, and he would speak from experience. Like he would say, oh, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. And I admired that, because I thought, oh my God, he didn't have to read anything to tell me. He saw it himself, he witnessed it, and he researched it, he found this, he was the authority. And that's what I enjoy the most, presiding over this internet revolution in the past 30 years, the kind of changes. And that's why I pay attention to everything, because I want to be speaking directly from my own experience, and not buying any BS from anybody. So, and you have the same thing. We have the same amount of time, and having conversations like this is and sharing it with everybody, because your perspectives are unique, and spreading it and then getting it out there, I think is a good thing. And podcast gives you the microphone, literally, to tell those. So, tell us a little bit about Mark Addison, where you grew up, and tell us about your business. And my favorite question is, what you do today, do you remember the first thing you did as a kid that resembles what you do today?
Born in San Francisco, um, grew up in the Bay Area. Uh, I'll skip to your last question. No, I didn't see any signs of this as a kid. What our business does today, remember I told you that we started as a PR firm, and then we've evolved a bit to be more of a, we say we grow reputations and revenues, and then a lot of times we take that all the way to the exit as well. But that was not based on any light bulb as a child. That was based on getting fired. And yeah, and that sort of put me in a situation where I said, all right, what am I good at, what am I not good at, and what do I want to do, and why did I hate my boss so much, and can I make something better? And so I did.
So, anybody else in the family who was an entrepreneur started their business?
Entrepreneur is an abused word. I had this conversation with my doctor, who now runs a very, very successful practice and has several other doctors and multiple locations. And I said, you never thought you'd be the CEO of a multi-million-dollar operation? And he looked at me like it just hit him for the first time that that he's the CEO of a multi-million-dollar operation. Yeah, my dad was an entrepreneur. He was a mechanic, and he fixed printing presses, but he owned his own business that fixed printing presses, and he had a contract with a German printing manufacturing company called Heidelberg, which was sort of like the creme of the creme. So I did grow up definitely in that. My dad didn't go off to work with a briefcase to some bank somewhere. He was definitely, he came home and had to do the invoices and all that stuff. So I definitely saw that as a kid. But yeah, that's that. In terms of influences growing up, that's about the extent of it. I had no idea of what marketing was all about growing up. somehow I was insulated from that.
But you had that entrepreneurship in your almost in your DNA. Don't discount that, Mark, because my parents were doctors and I knew nothing about business. And in fact, my father was somewhat business minded, and he would simply say to my mother, they both had the same, they were both gynecologists. So my father would say to my mother, what are you doing spending so much time with every patient? I do them in 20 minutes, you take an hour and a half. How many patients can you see per day? That was the extent of business mind. But as far as running a business, of course, they had their private practices and everything. But I never smelled any business air, never witnessed any business conversation, none of those things. So I envy people who grew up in homes where business was being talked and it was being shared. So I'm sure it played a role.
Maybe if there isn't, I am a partner in I helped two guys start a wine importing company that we grew literally from zero, like from whiteboard sketches to 20 million ARR. We ended up selling it to our top 3 best customers. And how did we do that? I guess I do have the entrepreneurial knack, and if I were to apply what do you call it? Not posthumously, but retroactively. That's the word. I'm not dead yet. A strategy to it, I'd say it's going after the non-obvious. So like with a wine company, we started that when there were a bunch of flash sale sites, Rue La La and Gilt Group and all these flash sale sites. And the co-founder originally wanted to just buy distressed wine and put it up on the web and sell them out, right? Sell them in, and then go find some more. And I ended up talking to the other co-founder, who was at the time the youngest ever master sommelier, and he had a little bit of a cult following around him because there's this Netflix movie called Somm, and he was one of the people in that movie, and it was all about his journey to pass the court of the master's exam and how grueling that really is. And he's a very charismatic guy. And I watched that movie and I talked to him and I realized that why would you take an asset and discount it, because that destroys value? What if we did the non-obvious thing? And what if we took an asset and added value to it and sold it for more? And so when I learned more about the master somm and what it takes, and me being a relatively novice wine buyer, I knew from personal experience that, an $80 bottle of wine is better than a $20 bottle. Why? Because it's 4 times more expensive. I don't know why, but there must be some reason.
Yeah.
And that's, and so what we would do is we would write these long, beautifully scripted articles about where the wine came from. And we would tell the story, who's the family, and this was the wine that, King Henry VIII served on the evening that, Anna Boleyn got executed or something like that. And that sort of helped add value. And then we found out when we talked to the labels that the labels hated the wine labels. They hated the discounters because it could overnight turn their $80 bottle of wine into a $20 bottle of wine just because one dude decides to discount it. And the better stuff was sold only to the retailers who vowed never to discount and who had buyer audiences that actually valued the stuff. This is especially when you go and talk to a farmer in Italy or France, a winemaker. This is a family business. They're farmers, right? This is all about the earth and everything like that. So they want to make sure that the buyer of the wine appreciates this craft that they've created. So we did the non-obvious thing. We went completely against what was popular at the time on the internet with the discounters. We flipped it on its head. We're saying we're going to find hard to get wine, we're going to add value, and then we're going to sell it online. And that worked beautifully because nobody was competing with us until everybody figured out that we were making money, and then we started to get competitors. But sometimes, going after the non-obvious thing can do wonders for you. And that loosely ties in with your sort of audacity theme here, in that sometimes it takes courage to go, you know what, everybody's going to zig, we're going to zag.
Yeah, exactly. Courage, and also a little bit of a stubbornness. Okay, you have to stand your ground no matter what, against all odds. That's it's the movie Against All Odds. Remember the old movie?
Now, I haven't
So
watched that
that's
one, but
oh, it's
I
very
will now.
yeah. Well, it's Phil Collins is the one that does the music. Anyway, it's you and I can talk, hours, but we don't have time. So tell us, how can people reach you? Give us your contact information, Mark.
Yes. So we own the domain rocketscience.com. We got that pretty early. We've got the international trademark to rocket science, believe it or not. So I'm Mark at rocketscience.com. And if you're anywhere even remotely related to the tech space, and you want either growth marketing, more organic growth marketing, or if you're about 2 to 3 years away from contemplating an exit, those are the two times when you should be contacting us, because we can help.
I'm sure you will hear from people, no doubt. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nick. Enjoyable conversation.
Thank you. Same here. And this brings us to the end of this episode, and I'll see you on the next one.
Audacity of Entrepreneurs podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.